Hola, buen dia. It's me, Peppermint. And when I'm not on RuPaul's Drag Race or simply being New York City's sweetest diva, I'm tuned into the fabulously empowering Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice Power Hour, coming to you every weeknight at 7 p.m. live from our good old friends at the BRCSJ Virtual HQ via their Facebook page. Tune in tonight.
Need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour. Social justice, power hour, power hour, power hour.
Good evening to our friends on the East Coast, good afternoon to our friends in the West, and good in-between time to our friends in those in-between spaces. Welcome, 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 my friends. Welcome to the Social Justice Power Hour. Welcome to the virtual headquarters, the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice. My name is Robt Seda-Schreiber. I am your host for this evening and the chief activist here at the center. And before I forget, and I don't want to be remiss, happy freaking New Year. The Power Hour is back, bigger and better and brighter than ever. Thank you for joining us in virtual communion. We have done this for the past year and 10, 11 months or 5 years or whatever it is. Time is a relative. Time is my relative. Time is my uncle. Welcome back, my friends, or welcome for the first time. We've been doing this since the pandemic started. Haven't missed a night, haven't missed a beat. Almost 500 shows, 450 some odd shows, many of them very odd indeed. And we're thrilled tonight to bring back to you one of those shows. Next week, we're going to host the incredible, the extraordinary Kelly Sue DeConnick, the author of Wonder Woman Historia, one of the best comic books. You know what? One of the best books in general of last year and continuing this year, continue to come out. And her artist partner on this project is the incredible Phil Jimenez. And we spoke to Phil a couple of months back on the Power Hour, and we want to bring back that conversation tonight. It was so fabulous. Phil was so fabulous. And to get you excited, to get you psyched, to get you ready for the conversation next week with Kelly Sue, here's Phil tonight, bringing back some important words. He is the first open and out comic book creator in the majors, in DC and Marvel, and he has led such a path. He is such a trailblazer, and he's such an extraordinary artist as well. So I'm thrilled to bring this back to you. But we also have a whole bunch of other stuff coming up on the Power Hour. And right quick, I just want to tell you what's going on. As always, every Tuesday night, we have our queer yoga, my friends. Come take a breath with us, both literally and figuratively, as our queer yoga master, Jasmani, leads us to virtual nirvana. We have our first Friday folk, as we always do, with renowned folk musician David Brzezinski. So please come join us for a wonderful concert to lead into your weekend, the first full weekend of the new year. And our old friend Steve Brodner. If you don't know this cat's work, you need to know he does the Greater Quiet series at The Nation magazine. He's been illustrating and doing the do for decades. And his book that is going to collect all of the Greater Quiet series that appeared in The Nation magazine originally is going to be published by Fantagraphics Books. And we're so excited about that. So come out for a great conversation and to see his work. And finally, it's going to be Muhammad Ali's birthday. So what better time to bring back to you this incredible conversation we had with Jonathan Ive, who's the author of Muhammad Ali, A Life, and the lovely and fabulous Rosie Perez. And you might know this cat. You can't be serious. You can't be serious. Yes, Cal Penn, as you know, late last year came out to our community, and he's going to come out to our Power Hour now and have a really meaningful conversation. So stay tuned, true believers. All of that and so much more coming up on the Power Hour. But I also would be remiss if I didn't mention to you just right quick that most of you are aware, but during the pandemic, we lost our headquarters, we lost our physical space, and we are looking to gather together in community in 2022. So if you are so inspired by this conversation tonight, by the Power Hour, or by the Bayard-Rustin Center for Social Justice mission and vision in general, please do consider giving whatever is within your means, within your heart, to help us find a new space for 2022. It's hard to be a safe space without a space, y'all, so please help us find a new home. But without further ado, here is our incredible, extraordinary, fabulous conversation with the incredible, extraordinary, fabulous Phil Jimenez to get you ready for a conversation next week with the equally fabulous, inspirational, incredible Kelly Sue DeConnick. So without further ado, enjoy the conversation tonight. If you saw it the first time, you're going to catch all the subtle nuances. And if you're seeing it for the first time, you are in for a treat, my friends. I'll catch you on the flip side to say goodnight. But until then, much love and respect. On with the show. For this evening's Power Hour, which I cannot tell you I am over the freaking moon about, we have tonight Phil Jimenez, who is an incredible comic book creator, a queer comic book creator, open and out and proud and trailblazing and leading the way for so many others, representing and making sure everybody is seen both on the page and in their comic book store and in the greater community. We're going to talk to Phil tonight about all that and so much more. And gosh, this is a special night for us. We're thrilled about this. Phil Jimenez is a multiple award-winning artist, film creator, toy designer, teacher, lecturer, but his main body of work, and body is the right word if you've ever seen Phil in person, has been in comic books, wherein he has worked for over 25 years for DC, Marvel, and numerous independents. And in this field, Phil is considered one of the most prominent gay creators in mainstream comics, as per Entertainment Weekly, The Advocate, and Out magazine. In fact, throughout Pride Month this year, Marvel is planning to celebrate by featuring variant covers developed by Phil, featuring Marvel's LGBTQI characters. Phil's journey as a queer creator in the comic book world is all at once inspirational and aspirational to all LGBTQI youth as well as adults who often don't see themselves represented on the pages of the comic books they read, but even less so in the folks behind the scenes writing and drawing these books. Throughout his incredibly successful career, Phil has strived to create that identity for these marginalized readers, and in doing so, has created an ever-growing safe space for these fans to feel seen. And now we look forward to seeing Phil, his own self, at our Bayard-Rustin Center for Social Justice virtual headquarters to share his personal journey and how he has used his powerful voice and extraordinary artwork to represent, recognize, and celebrate so many of us. So please join me in welcoming Phil Jimenez to our Bayard-Rustin Center for Social Justice Power Hour. Phil, thank you so much for being with us, my friend.
How are you?
I am delightful seeing you. How are you?
I'm good, actually. I was listening to your intro, which I was very grateful for. There was a lot of aggrandizing, but I appreciate it.
You deserve it. You, my friend, have really trailblazer is a word too often used and hyperbolically, right? But in your case, there's no hyperbole involved. You have created a path for others to follow. And I have been a fan of your work. You know, I used to go to my local comic book store when I was 11, 12, 13. And you know, I've been always, you know, it used to be, you will probably remember this because you and I are roughly the same age, I think. You know, you used to be able to only find comic books like in a store in Brooklyn. You'd have to go and find, you know, that comic book store.
Right.
Now they're more ever present. But it was always a niche. It was always a place for folks to gather who were out of the ordinary, who were outcast, who were different. So it's about time that the LGBTQI community caught up to that. And I know that it's been only a short while when there's been as much representation now as there is.
Yes, gosh, you just touched on a million things I'm always really fascinated by. So this year will be my 30th year writing and drawing comic books, which is kind of fascinating just because that time went by really, really fast. And and it's funny when you talk about trailblazers, because I have seen myself in charts. Andy Mangels, who created the sort of now historic and legendary Gays and Comics panel at San Diego Comic-Con. It was the first out LGBTQ panel at any major convention ever. Now I think it's 35 or 40 years going. He created the sort of gay timeline, and it turned out that I was the first out mainstream superhero artist. So it was not by any stretch the first out gay artist in comics, but in our world there tend to be a couple of spaces, one of which is mainstream superhero comics or corporate comics, you know, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, the Avengers, and then of course the independent world. And it's a really really simple and reductive way to think of the industry, but there really are, or historically had been, two worlds. And so I knew, of course, of a lot of gay creators, but I also realized that they were underground cartoonists or alternative comics or strip artists. And even in my business, I knew that there were gay creators, but they were not out. And so I came out partially because my boyfriend died of AIDS. And so I created a tribute to him, a tribute book to him. And he was a really important person at DC Comics. His name was Neil Posner. And he was a creative director, and he was one of my mentors and teachers. And when I came out, it was mostly, again, as a tribute to him. But it never occurred to me that it was history making in any way. And I've always appreciated the fact that DC let me create this book. It was called Tempest, and created in tribute to him, and sort of give him like a loving goodbye. But it didn't occur to me that that was actually a historic moment. What I will say, being in this business, particularly DC Comics, is really extraordinary. Like I always say I grew up there because I started working there when I was 21, and from about 21 to 30, maybe a little bit longer, this was the 90s. DC was actually, behind the scenes, was a really diverse space, and diverse is a word that sort of grates on me, but literally there were a lot of LGBTQ people, a lot of folks of color. We were all young and we were all kind of making comics. I joke that a lot of the comics probably weren't very good, but it was a really extraordinary community of people and a great space to be out in. So I often credit DC Comics, at least the offices, if not their content, for allowing me to be out without question. So it was, and freely and in a space of safety. So Jenna Khan and later Paul Levitz, but all those people at DC that allowed me to be me and allowed others to be themselves, I always like to give kudos to, because I don't think, I am who I am today not partly, through a very good amount because of DC Comics and how they let me be me. I also think it helped that I could draw really well and make them some money. I mean, would let me do that if I didn't have the sensibilities I did and the skill set that I did. But I'm grateful for that. So it's just funny hearing you talk about this historically, because I also think that in our business currently, there's this amazing wave of out gay creators. We have FlameCon, which is an out, it's a convention literally for LGBTQ people. Of course, anyone's invited, but it was created to showcase LGBTQ people in our world, like in our business. And it's a huge, thriving convention. I said it's my favorite convention of the year. I love that. I love that show. And it's actually gotten too big, although clearly COVID has just sort of shut it down for the year. But before COVID, it outgrew its space every year. And among those people, I bring it up simply because there are a lot of incredibly young, award-winning, highly skilled, highly talented practitioners who are making really amazing work across all genres. And that was not necessarily true when I was in comics. And so I actually just think, in my head, these are the trailblazers. Like, these are the ones that are telling this really wide variety of stories with with a huge swath and an enormously diverse array of characters. So to me, they're the trailblazers.
Well, but they're trailblazing in a different way in almost in content, right? Whereas you were trailblazing in creating the conduit that they could do that.
Sure. I mean, I'm not trying to strip away my history or my point, but like, I even think about Andy Mangels, who, as I was saying, like created that convention, that panel, that convention. I mean, he was out. I remember actually seeing him at my first San Diego convention when I was maybe 14 or 15. It might have been in Los Angeles. And he was, he's a leather daddy, and he had his boy on a leash, and they were walking through this convention. And I remember sort of being taken aback by it, because I think it was the first time I actually ever saw something like that. But what was hilarious was to be introduced to him years later and be like, oh, I know who you are. But to me, he was also a trailblazer because he created those forums and those spaces. I am grateful for my part in history, and I don't deny it. I'm certainly like now the daddy of gay comics, and I will own it. And I'm really super excited to see what younger people and sort of fresh voices are doing in the space. And it's really exciting to see, I think, queer people writing queer characters and queer stories. So many characters, for example, like North Star and Apollo and Midnighter, were created by non-queer people. I would say mostly with good intention, but it's kind of lovely just to have actual queer creators take those characters and spin them in hopefully new directions that their straight creators would never have considered, just because of their body of experience or the commercial demands of the industry.
And this is my fear with having you on the show, is we can go down so many different rabbit holes, and I want to stay somewhat focused, although I feel like you and I probably won't be able to do that so much. But
tell me what we're focusing on.
Well, I just, when you mentioned North Star, that to me, he is an interesting example, because Marvel really didn't know what the fuck to do with him once he came out. And there were so many different storylines that were started and abandoned, and they really didn't find his voice until somewhat recently. And then there was, I believe, A Wonderful Wedding. And I think that finally he's on a journey that makes sense for that character and for the community.
So, I mean, this is parsing through the weeds. For those who don't know, North Star was the first out mainstream superhero character. He was a member of a team of Canadian superheroes called Alpha Flight, and he was a famous ski champion who also had super speed. And in his earliest appearances, which were in the mid-'80s, when Marvel Comics had a policy that you could not use the word gay and characters could not be openly gay, John Byrne, the writer and artist of the book, found amazing ways to get around that, visually, through coded language, through a kind of interesting relationship with the character, had a really interesting relationship with his twin sister. And in hindsight, I still think that was the most interesting North Star ever was, which leads to, like, I'm not, and God bless, I've talked to the creators and sort of teased them about it. Like, North Star in my head, I have a certain headcanon for that character, particularly, it speaks more largely to representation in comics. North Star was also like a French separatist, like he was a terrorist, and was so fucking interesting because of it, right? So he was a character with a political point of view that had something that was nationalist as opposed to sort of LGBTQ identity. He was not closeted in the book, but he was closeted to readers if you didn't know the language. If you go back and read those early books, it's all there, which is kind of extraordinary. And so his official outing was really interesting, again, written by a straight person, and it's sort of regarded as one of the most awkward outings ever in comics, which still makes me laugh. But North Star's journey is one that fascinates me because I found him the most interesting in his earlier days before he was out. Like, and I'm one of those people, and this is very controversial, but I've said it on panels before. I rejected and resisted for a long time, and still do, the tendency in mainstream superhero comics to quickly couple up and marry off gay characters, and sort of neuter them, desexualize them, etc., to make them kind of acceptable. And one of the things I've been very interested in with North Star and other characters, like the wedding of North Star, which I think there are some real fans of out there. And to be fair, I didn't track a lot of the characters' relationships through the wedding. Just disinterested me because I don't remember him having a particularly extraordinary, interesting love life before he got married. I've been on a lot of panels about this where gay, mostly male married fans are a little hurt that I resist the temptation for gay characters in comics, particularly superhero comics, to quickly couple off and marry. And I remember one couple specifically said, well, do you think our marriage is boring or unimportant? And I was like, no. But I think in comics, if we're talking about representation and diversity, etc., what I'm interested in is sort of the width and breadth of the possibility of queer relationships, and less interested in seeing characters married off quickly. This is a strange tangent, but it has a lot to do with representation and what makes for acceptable gay characters. There's a lot in what I was just saying, but it's his path, his journey as a character is very, very interesting to me. Because some people like I really like his almost pre-closeted days because they were more layered. But a lot of people like him now because he's out and he's married and sort of probably ultimately a more positive representative of the community at large. But I find in that he's a lot less interesting to me.
No, and I understand that. And so I guess it begs the question, what if his relationship, his marriage, was a sexual being? What if it was, a really romantic, thriving sexual experience that the readers were to be able to be engaged in? Would that help you at all? And we're not talking about the larger community, the greater community. We're talking about how you feel, because it's important that you've been through seeing all these different characters represent in different ways. So is it you use the word neutered? And that's the way that many people see marriage. Marriage is, once you get married, your life is dull, your sex life is dull. It's not a part of who you are anymore. So if their relationship was more sexual, would that be something that you would be more open to and more interested in?
See, here's the thing. This is going to sound really strange, and I don't think my opinion matters, actually. And so I'm not working with I got to draw North Star for these covers. It's one of my favorite drawings I've done in a long time. The black and white one particularly, I'm very, very fond of, because I drew him the way I still remember him. So there's a touch of nostalgia. But I was saying earlier, I've been in this business 30 years, and these characters cannot remain static. And they don't necessarily need to represent my interests or me. Like, if there's a current audience that loves North Star as he is, God bless them. Like, I can sort of mutter and grumble in the corner, but it doesn't, like, I'm much more interested now in audiences having characters where they can see themselves than I am in sort of fueling my own needs or wants from this fantasy material. My larger issues also are metatextual, in that when I say he was neutered or other characters are neutered, what I mean by that is the tendency to marry off gay characters comes from a space of making them respectable to straight consumers. They're not whoring around, they don't have multiple sex partners, etc., which makes folks uncomfortable, some folks. And they're not parts of love triangles. You don't have to deal with you can have romance, don't get me wrong, but there's not often a ton of soap opera, which I find is actually very appealing. I'm personally attracted to. That said, clearly that couple and, you know, thousands of other people find Midnight and Apollo, that relationship and that coupling. I know so many people that worship them. I'm like, God bless you. Or North Star and his husband, God bless you. And I feel like there are other characters I'm forgetting, although I do like Wiccan and Hulking a lot. But the tendency, again, to sort of very quickly cut off dating and sexual experience to get them into a relationship to make them respectable. For me, that's as much a metatextual read of the editorial process as it is of the character's story. Like, it makes them more palatable to sell. And so I'm like, well, I'm not buying, I'm making, and so I want books that people are happy to buy. And if that's what if they want to see themselves represented that way, that's great.
Yeah, but your point is very valid, and it's something that is always a concern. It's like on Modern Family, you know, we had a gay couple and that was wonderful, but we never saw them. You know, if we saw them kiss a half a dozen times in all those years that show was on the air, I'd be surprised if it was that many times.
Sure.
So it's always that neutering, as you said, that language is exactly right, that gay characters are palatable up to a certain point. And then...
Oh, no, please continue.
No, that was it. And then they're not going to be something that the vast majority of folks will be accepting of, and then it comes down to buying and consuming that product, whether it be a TV show, a movie, or a comic book.
This is might be a spin, but it does make me think, as ever, about representation in fiction and what that means. So because I'm older, and because I'm a white cis male, I've had the good fortune most of my life of having representation in fiction. And I have often joked that I never really needed to see a homosexual male character, but I definitely wanted queer content, i.e. content that queered the world in many ways. So I often say that for me, like the Linda Carter Wonder Woman show, like that was all the gay shit I needed, or Dynasty in Dallas, that was all the gay shit I needed. Because what appealed to me was in terms of representation, was sensibility more than specificity. And one thing I've been very interested in recent years is how people are very, very eager to see themselves specifically represented in their fiction, partly because they never have. And I think I had the luxury of not really thinking about it because I could see myself so often. And so one of the things I think is really interesting about particularly queer representation, again, is, and I'm remembering a panel, I'm trying to remember what town we were in, and I got this really engaged conversation with mostly younger people about their need to see themselves in the work. And I was thinking about Marvel Comics is putting out this Hellfire Club gala, and it's all their characters in this like high-end fashion, and they've been promoting the artwork and the artist, and it's fucking amazing. And it's so fucking gay. And if there's a queer character among them, I don't care, because the entire concept and the entire approach is so fucking queer. They're doing a fashion show. They're doing Drag Race, Project Runway in the X-Men, right? Like, to me, that is like as gay as it gets. And like I shared on Twitter, like the image of Colossus, which is so fucking sexy. And so for me, what's really interesting, as an older gay creator, is thinking about what representation means in a broader sense. Like I've often said, so in mainstream superhero comics particularly, I think a lot about, and I've had some really interesting academic discussions about if you have Black characters, for example, who are members of the Justice League, but are not actively working against institutionalized racism. If they're not rethinking justice by force, if they're not rethinking sort of cosmic policing, right? Like, does it matter? How much does that representation matter? And I think about this a lot with queer characters. If they're not actively dealing with things that I think affect our community, ranging everything from, horrible bias, political apathy, HIV stigma, whatever, but they're there, but they're two boyfriends at Professor X's school, is that enough for representation? And what I've discovered for many is that it is. When I did a book about 15 years ago and introduced a gay character, I was so not interested in his love life. I was interested in his relationship to gay community and what our responsibilities are toward each other. Pardon me, if we are indeed a community. And I remember all the gay press at the time just wanted to know if he was going to get a boyfriend. And I was really struck by, I guess, how important that was in terms of representation, that just seeing two gay men, or in this case, I mean, he was, like, I think the character was in his early 20s, in some sort of romantic relationship was way more important than any larger discussions about gay identity, gay responsibility, whatever. So again, I babble on, but I bring this up simply to say when it comes to representation, starting with North Star and coming now to all these, Marvel has tons of LGBTQ characters. It makes me think about what's important representation, what isn't.
No, and that it's an important question to explore. And what people often think is that marginalized communities are this monolithic, one viewpoint, one path, one type of person thing, when there are really so many different, as a man or a woman or a non-binary person contains multitudes, so does a community.
Sure.
And as our culture catches up to representation, it's lagging behind, knowing that that's a part of it too, that there are multiple identities in any community. It's not one identity that will suit everybody and represent everybody in that community. So when you have a North Star, then you need 5, 10, 15, 20 other characters that will represent the different ideas and the different folks in that community.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, in the numerous panels that we've done about this over the years, it's a common conundrum, although I think we're catching up, in that North Star for the longest time was the only gay character. So, of course, we had to heap all of our gay hopes and dreams on him. It was the same with, there were certain characters that represented entire, literally millions of people. And it was just an unfair burden but they were the only one. And so with so many different characters, there are all sorts of different kinds of representation. And I think it's easier to imprint on characters. Again, for me, it's often less about needing to see a very specifically homosexual male character than a general sensibility. Thor Ragnarok, that movie, I adore because it's so fucking gay. That's a queer fucking movie, even though it's super mainstream and very cis-het in most of its way. But the sensibilities of it are just so queering. And to your audience, and I've said this before in many lectures, I tend to use queer in a fairly broad sense, meaning slightly different, anti-definition, anti-patriarchy, not simply in terms of sexual identity, but kind of an identity of worldview that resists tradition and sort of kind of parochial ideas of how men and women should behave or how things should look. So just to put that out there.
It's funny you mentioned Thor, and I'm sure you know of it, and I wish I had it to show our audience. There's a great cover by Barry Windsor Smith of Thor, and the hammer is exploding this rainbow, and it is like the queerest comic book cover
right.
ever. It's beautiful, and it's graceful, and it's just gorgeous. But again, we go off to another tangent. I'd like to bring back something you said at the outset, and you know, if this becomes uncomfortable, if we're overstepping, please, you know.
Go ahead.
You mentioned your coming out process personally with Tempest, which was brilliant, by the way. That it was a reaction to losing your partner, and so your coming out was an act of love.
Yes, for sure.
And it wasn't something that was really engineered or thought about or manipulated. It was something that struck you. This is something I have to do as a tribute to my lover, to my partner, to the person who was my world. Before that, had you considered your identity and your place in the comic book world and what that meant? Was that something that was an ongoing conversation, either in your own head or with friends and members of your community, or even your partner? You know, was it something that came up previously, or was it really this kind of epiphanous moment of love and loss and wanting to create that space?
If I understand your question correctly, so I started drawing comics when I was 21, and I started dating Neil when I was 22. So I was out personally within my first year of comics, but I came out to the world after Neil died, which was in '94. So, and that comic book Tempest, and so my memories were very interesting because my one concern, and I've often said this, so great motivator for me as a child. I think this is very common. So I knew I was gay, tried to hide it, tried to closet it, was not a very good closeted gay. But my feeling was if I could move to New York and become a famous comic book artist and sort of see my name in lights, it would mitigate the negative feelings my family had about me being gay. Like, it would balance things out. So that was a huge driver for me early on. Also, I was just like, if I can't do this, I will live a particularly mundane life that I was not interested in. The X-Men were so impactful to me, and their lives were so extraordinary. And I kid you not, I was just like, if being an outsider, being rejected by humanity means I can live in a mansion in upstate New York and wear drag queen clothes and go to clubs and go to outer space, I was like, sign me up. I did not mind being an outsider if it meant I could be one of the X-Men. And so and the X-Men lived in New York. That was a huge driver for me to go and be a part of that world. But when I came out in the back of this book, Tempest, that I created as a tribute to Neil, my one concern was my family, because everyone kind of knew, but I was coming out in a big way. And my mother panicked because she thought her parents would not understand. And it turned out everyone understood, because I don't think it was a surprise. And I got actually a lot of accolades. I got a lot of support from my family. When I came out, I got phone calls from people I hadn't heard from a very long time. So it was shockingly affirming, and quite lovely. My mother became okay with it very soon after. She had lots of guilt about it because I was an only child, and she was one of those people. It was just generational, where she thought she'd done something wrong, and there was lots of questioning about, like, what did she do to make me gay? Strangely, my grandmother, so my grandparents were quite conservative, but my grandmother in her older years, when she would come to visit, like, she loved the gays. Like, she was fabulous with it. And then my other side of the family, I have like 2 gay cousins. It ended up, my mother's fears, which are part of what kept me closeted, became unfounded. Once I realized that there were these family members who were cool with it, I didn't really care what the rest of the world thought. It was really a remarkable transformation, and I rather enjoyed being an out professional gay, and I really liked having that role in the business in the time that I did. As more and more people sort of came out, like, I liked it. It was not something I ran from.
So it interests me. Did you notate yourself when you were on this journey? You're like, I want to, and it's interesting to me to think of a comic book artist having their name in lights, and I think that's fascinating because to me, I always celebrated artists, and you and I have parallel journeys. The X-Men were such a touchstone for so many of us, and
Yes.
at the outset, I mentioned going to those those little hole in the wall comic book stores in Brooklyn, where the only place you can find back issues, and that was defined X-Men. That was defined. Where's X-Men 107?
Right.
Where, 109 is the first issue of Alpha Flight. And that's the kind of stuff that percolates in my head all the time, unfortunately, because I'm demented that way. But so those moments in comics, you were able, and I love this, and I want to give voice to this. You said something that I haven't heard before. That to you it was more about sensibility than specificity, and I find that to be really, that's so empowering, because then you can see so much more. It opens up the world to you. And I'm not saying that's good enough for everybody, but maybe that does help some folks to say, oh my gosh, right. So there's not this one person, but there's this idea or this feeling that represents how I feel. And that I find to be fascinating.
So, again, I do want to reiterate, I think I have the luxury of feeling that way in some way because most fiction growing up represented me. Like, physically. Actors were mostly white. It did, like, I was never longing for physical representation in fiction. So it allowed me to look for other things and respond to other things. And so I think it's important to say that. Like, I had that's a real luxury, I think, to have, to grow up seeing yourself in your fiction. But it also, like, I've just always found that the stuff that draws me in it's about an idea, it's about a point of view. Grant Morrison, for example, on The Invisibles, which did have, I think mainstream comics' first drag queen shaman superhero character, Lord Fanny, and she was fucking amazing. But that whole book had a sensibility, it had a point of view that I was like, this is fucking amazing. Sort of Chris Claremont's X-Men, The New Mutants, Alpha Flight, which is John Byrne's Alpha Flight. I fucking love that book because it's like, it's odd, it's weird. Like, I'm not even sure he enjoyed doing it, but all those oddball characters, of whom one was gay, admittedly, but a curmudgeon. He was an asshole back then, which I loved. But I was obsessed with his twin sister because she was a split personality. They were just odd. And I find, and again, I think it's the way I use the term queer, which is, it may or may not be correct, and I know it's controversial among some, but it's about a way of seeing the world. It's about a way of skewing the world, sometimes just enough, just to sort of throw it off kilter. And it's one of the things I love about being gay. It's one of the things I love about being part of the queer community is that shift, right? Like, and those are the members of our community I'm just so fucking excited about, when they push and pull against tradition, against patriarchy, against the normal, and get something really extraordinary about it. I have often said, and I'm sure a million people have said this, that one of the great tragedies of AIDS, of course, is that we lost thousands of designers with very specific sensibilities, and without them, the vacuum was filled with others who didn't have those sensibilities. I think all the time about how when Neil died at DC Comics, Neil was a comic book nerd. That guy was a nerd, but he was also a theater queen, a Fire Island queen, Jewish from Long Island. There was all this stuff and fucking amazing designer. And he was a really important part of the sort of kind of DC editorial group. And when he left, his queer influence left, and the vacuum was filled by three straight guys. And it really changed the creative direction of the company, who was hired, the sorts of stories that were told. And I should say again, it was still a very friendly company, but without Neil's queer presence, you could feel the tonal shift in the content itself. And so I think so much about again, we're spinning, but mostly about the importance of point of view as much as simple representation, right? Like, a gay character interests me far less if they don't have an interesting or queering point of view that might spin a story in a way that's unexpected. I am one of those people that did not love Apollo and Midnighter, who were DC's most popular gay couple, because when they were introduced, partly they were parody. It was like, oh, what if Superman's fucking Batman? So their origins still always throw me, but also they were mass murderers. They were part of a villain team. I'm like, I don't want queer people who are mass murderers, but I also know that for many young people, particularly queer people, and I have actually a good story about this, to see physically empowered gay people living out fantasies that we could not was more vital to them than any sort of political ideology. A very important story I tell a lot about when I was on Wonder Woman many years ago. I worked very, very hard to make Wonder Woman a non-combatant for much of the first year I wrote into her stories, knowing that I was going to have this final showdown with one of her villains. It was going to be very physical, and she was going to kind of be unleashed. And I met a guy who hated the fact that every time she fought a villain, she outsmarted him or offered a hand of peace or used the lasso to shut him down. He just wanted to see her beat the shit out of people. And he explained that he was a queer kid, he was from the Philippines, and he was bullied all the time, and he was beat up all the time, and the people that did it never got their comeuppance. There was no justice. So he read comics in many ways to see good guys beat up bad guys. That violence meant something to him because it was expression. He could at least see in this fiction what he could not experience in his own life. And I've carried that story with me for so long because I no matter how sort of in my head I get about the academics of it all, what it all means, it's why I also realize I'm not that important, right? Like, I want these books and these stories in some ways to represent the needs and the fantasies of the new queer people that are consuming them. So there may or may not be like a queer sensibility. Maybe what they do need is a certain kind of representation, and who am I to get in the way of that? Good, more of it.
When you talk about Neil, it begs the question of how many folks were working at that time and before that weren't recognized, that weren't able to be out, that weren't given the due and the respect they deserve. Has there ever been any conversation about raising up those names, about finding those folks, about creating that queer history within mainstream comics? Because we've talked about independent comics, you know, they have their queer identities, they have their queer creators, they have a history. But mainstream comics, you know, you were the first out. This is, you know, established fact. But of course, there were so many more before you who, through circumstance or through fear or through whatever it was, they weren't able to live their full lives. And I'm wondering if that's ever been part of a conversation that you've had to lift up these names, to recognize these folks, to find that history.
Good question. I do believe that there are comics historians, folks like Andy Mangels, who I keep bringing up, Justin Hall, who I don't know if you've interviewed, but you should, because he's amazing, who edited No Straight Lines, which is a 40-year compendium of queer comics, mostly independent. But if there's anyone that's going to know the answers to that question, it's Justin. There are some really amazing historians and some folks who track that. Our business is odd in that, like a lot of entertainment, I think so many of its people are seen as expendable. There are the trailblazers and the big names and some workhorses, but there are a lot of people across multiple spectrums that have contributed and are now forgotten. and I don't think that's a good thing at all. But I've been talking to some old timers, folks who are older than me, about their memories, and they'll bring up names. I'm like, who's that? Who's that? Who's that? And I feel like there's a whole mini encyclopedia of people who have been forgotten in our business, which makes me sad. But for LGBTQ people in particular, I would expect that there are some historians that must know who some of those people are. But I don't. It's not a conversation that comes up a lot among my peers.
Right. So going back to your personal journey, can we talk pre-comics a bit?
Sure.
So you came up and you wanted to find, you knew you wanted to be a comic book illustrator. You wanted to be an artist. This was always your...
No.
I
wanted to be, and still do, I wanted to work in museum exhibition and design. So I was a museum kid. And so what I thought I was going to do when I grew up was design museum exhibits or zoos. That was my goal in life. I was obsessed with dinosaurs and sharks. I was very boy that way. Like I liked, dinosaurs and monsters and animals and things like that, and would spend copious hours memorizing animal statistics that I don't remember now, but were very important to me when I was little. But I was a giant TV fan. I actually attribute my love of fiction and storytelling to TV shows. And everything from the cartoons particularly, but the Super Friends, any of those Saturday morning lineups, shows like The Bionic Woman and Wonder Woman, soap operas. I'm obsessed with soap operas. What I really love is long form narrative. I like ongoing stories. I love cliffhangers. And so what I would do is I would watch movies or TV shows, and then my family owned this shaver shop in Santa Monica, California. And so I would sometimes sit there and I would literally redraw the story that I had, some TV show that I watched the night before, and then make my family go through every drawing of it as I recounted the story. And then it was actually in high school. So I read some comics occasionally, but again, I was a real TV nerd. And then these two twins, Eric and Erica Teasley, saw that I could draw. I was drawing instead of doing my algebra, and they're like, "Hey, can you draw this?" And it was an image of Colossus, and it was from the X-Men. Like, "Can you copy this?" I was like, "Sure." So of course I copied Colossus in my little 13 or 14-year-old way. And then I started reading the book. And of course it hit, it was everything that I loved. So it was fantasy, it was superhero, it was sexy, it was the X-Men, of course. It was narrative fiction, it was cliffhangers. I was just like, oh my God, what is this? And fell in love with the medium instantly. I had read the Star Wars comics from Marvel Comics because I was a Star Wars nerd. Like, obsessed with Star Wars. That was my end to comics.
Yeah.
And so what I started doing was started making these makeshift comics of my own, started turning my high school friends into really bad, cheap copies of those X-Men characters. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I'd created about 50 comic books. Hilariously, I also made them for my health teacher and these two attorneys I worked for in mock trial, all of them men that I had enormous crushes on. And I worked out my crushes in them, which is really funny. There's the stuff that I did in the men were shirtless constantly and their girlfriends or wives were being kidnapped constantly. But I ended up it turned out I had a real skill for narrative storytelling. So desperate to get out of, at the time I was living in Huntington Beach, or near Huntington Beach, desperate to leave. I was like, what the fuck am I going to do? I'm like, I know, I'm going to go draw comic books for a living. And so probably 16 or 17, I got it in my head that that's what I was going to do. And I used the 50 or so comics that I had drawn, like as my portfolio to get into the School of Visual Arts in New York City. And I got in. So it's Eric and Erica Teasley who introduced me to the X-Men comics. in algebra, and it was Colossus that got me into comics.
So thank you to the twins.
Yes,
And no wonder you like North Star and his.
and Aura. Yes.
So then you this is your path now, and you start to want to do this, and you see yourself represented in, again, this sensibility of the X-Men, and you say, okay, this is someplace that is welcoming to me. But behind the scenes, there's no one for you to look to as an exemplar, as an inspiration, as someone that you can say, that's who I want to be, or that's my possibility model, as it were. So were you comfortable and confident that you could find yourself as a gay man, as a comic book reader?
So I feel like I'm the bad person to ask. I didn't care about that. The person who was my idol, my mentor, George Perez, was for many, many years after I got into the business. And he, again, had a queer, he was not a gay man, but he certainly had a queer sensibility. He's well known for drawing the New Teen Titans and Wonder Woman, and Crisis on Infinite Earths, books that I fucking adored and still do. And it's really fascinating because, like, you know, he was sort of well known among my gay peers, but, you know, because he would draw Dick Grayson, often only in his little running shorts, or he drew Starfire, who looked like a big drag queen, or, you know, he just all his time on Wonder Woman with the Amazons. It was a way of working. It was a way of seeing the world. It was a way of representation that wasn't necessarily gay, but was totally, like, queering compared to other things like the Avengers of the Justice League, which were hard, straight, traditional, not particularly expansive. And Perez remained my idol. So I didn't seek out specifically homosexual representation in comics. Who I did seek out was George, and then this woman, Karen Berger, who edited all my favorite books. Another favorite book of mine was Legion of Superheroes, who have some of, at the time, it's one of the gayest fucking books out there, queerest, I should say, because it's about a bunch of, like, hot teenage superheroes in the future in bathing suits running around in space fighting bad guys. And, like, it's just so, in its way, it's so fabulous. And kind of well-renowned. And, like, there was a period of time in the 70s and 80s, those costumes were disco fabulous, insane. Right? Like, Cosmic Boy still has a costume. Everyone is like, what the fuck were they thinking? I'm like, I love that costume so much because it's so queer. But the period of time I wrote it was written by a very straight guy, the president of the company, who was sort of like one of my parents at DC Comics, a really good friend of Neil's. Not a queer thing about him in person, but the world he created was enough to draw me in. So it's again, I didn't need someone who was like me. I needed someone who thought like I did about the world, or who would inspire me to think about the world differently. And the artist that I was drawn to did.
That's it's so fascinating to me the way you see this. It's so encouraging because, you know, I think that so many times over the past year we've talked about the idea of a possibility model here in the Power Hour, and, you know, we didn't coin that term, and, you know, it's used all over the place. I take no ownership of it or think that we have, you know, cornered the market on that term, but it's been something that's come up a lot as a concept. And a lot of our guests have been that to so many, and you are that to so many folks. But it's so interesting to me that you didn't need that you saw that to you a possibility model wasn't a person, but it was a concept. It was, as you said, a sensibility. I love this. This is, to me, huge for me to start to. It broadens my understanding of what this could mean to people, and I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Oh gosh, I always feel like I'm such a letdown. And so in recent years, I've talked about this a lot, mostly on diversity panels and LGBTQ panels, particularly about representation. And I always feel like a bit like the odd man out, the odd queer out, because I just didn't. Like, and it might be because I had such a highly evolved fantasy world in my brain. It might be because I had sort of turned off, and this is very possible too, that when I was younger, I first had sex when I was 13, and then didn't have sex again until I was 20. So I was hyper focused in those high school years about getting good grades, getting to college, making these comics, getting the fuck out. When I got to college, I was hyper focused about getting a job. And so part of that might have been also because my sexuality specifically was shut down a little bit, right? Like, so I knew I was gay, but I was not going to focus on it because that energy would have taken from my focus, my career focus. And it also, you know, I probably wasn't mature enough to actually confront it. So that also might be a part of it. But I just don't ever remember personally needing to see someone. And again, I'm using the word specifically homosexual because in these discussions I've had on these other panels, often what I find really when you get down to it in terms of representation is what people want to see are usually same sex or same gender couples in a romantic relationship, right? So like, I didn't ever need to see North Star in a romance. Like, it just didn't occur to me that that was important. If he was, that was fine, but it wasn't like something I craved in a way that I think other people do. But Alpha Flight as a team, the worlds that they went to and the way they navigated each other and just the oddballs, that was like my everything. Like, that's really what got me off, way more than the idea of necessarily seeing North Star getting off with another male in the book.
You have expanded my view personally, and I want to thank you for that. And I think you've brought a very interesting, many very interesting ideas to our community. And we are way beyond the power hour. We're in the after party. Prince be proud. I cannot thank you enough for sharing all this. This is fascinating stuff. The whole idea of sensibility over specificity, of you needing not that romantic relationship, but that kind of more broad outlook into just being a member of, you know, the greater community. All of this is, you know, and maybe I've been living under a rock, you know, but I feel like there's so much that expands my view of what community means to you, and you bring that to become, you know, an exponential factor in, you know, how we can see representation as a greater thing and not this one thing, but many things.
I honestly hope so. I'm one dude who spends a lot of time by myself drawing, so take it or leave it, right? Like, these are just ideas that I've had, but specifically as it comes to these new waves of representation in my business, in mainstream superhero comics, and just what representation means and what it needs to be. And again, I'm old, so I'm looking forward to seeing how new and fresh talent take this stuff and they represent themselves and they push those boundaries even further.
You keep saying you're old, but we're the same age, so you can't be old. I'm
old in our business. I'm just saying, and I'm lucky. I'm still working, but it's comics is a game for the young. It's a tough business, and I'm just personally really happy to see some fresh voices in it, because I think all businesses need to be refreshed with new points of view.
I totally agree with you, but the truth is that you bring still so much freshness to it. I mean, your work is still, you know, if not just as good, better. It just keeps growing and maturing with you. So thank you for that. It's been wonderful tonight. I really appreciate it. I know we have a lot of non-comics fans out there watching the show, and I know we have a lot of folks that you've brought to the yard. Don't be sorry. This is about expanding people's views. You know, it's the same as having another author or an actor or, you know, a storyteller. You know, we need to expand how we see things, what we see, what we intake as far as entertainment. And now someone will seek out one of your Wonder Woman comics, or especially Tempest, you know, find that
Whew.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it's old. Just a quick, the one thing I'm working on should be out in October. DC Comics. It's Historia. It's a history of Wonder Woman's people, the Amazons. I bring it up because it's written by Kelly Sue DeConnick, who's this amazing author that you should check out. Books like Bitch Planet and Pretty Deadly. She also wrote Captain Marvel for Marvel. The reason I bring this up, it is the first time, I believe, that a woman has ever written the history of Wonder Woman's people for a mainstream comic. And so I'm drawing it, and it's absolutely mind-blowing.
I'm so excited. I didn't want to ask you about it because I knew that it's been delayed. I wasn't sure of its status.
Oh, that's just me. So we're just wrapping up the art on it. The artwork, I have to say, is also, I've never been as proud of anything as I've worked on. And it's a fucking queer sensibility, let me tell you. Like, you could totally tell a gay person drew it. Yeah, and it's been delayed because of me, but it's finally on track to be. It's coming out in October, which is my 30th anniversary in the business, which is also Wonder Woman's 80th anniversary. So there you go.
Yeah.
End of pitch.
We'd love to have you and her back on the show when it comes out. We'd love to have her on the show. She's someone on my
great. Oh my God, she's amazing.
Well, you'll introduce us.
Yes, I will, absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for tonight.
Take care.
So wonderful. And by the way, let me just shout out what you were talking about just now in case people missed it at the outset. It's called Historia, and it'll be out in October. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Thank you, my friend. We will see you again. Be well, be good. Best to everybody, and keep drawing, please.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you, my friend, for stopping by. Wonderful. Wonderful. So that's Phil Jimenez, everybody, who is the first openly out gay creator in mainstream comics, which is important to delineate all those factors, but has been an incredibly strong and important voice for almost 30 years. Be 30 years in October, we learned tonight. So let's celebrate that anniversary when it comes about. And also just an incredibly talented artist. So not only one of the best gay creators, but one of the best creators. So find the work, follow Phil's career, follow his work, find some of the back issues, as we call them in the comic world. And what a wonderful conversation. Really eye-opening me personally. I hope that you and the community, you viewers, got some of that same kind of idea of different kinds of representation. And I want to give voice to this again because I just find it to be a fascinating concept of sensibility over specificity. I'm gonna chew on that for a bit of time tonight and in the future. So thank you, Phil Jimenez. Thank you all. What I tell you, my friends, what a great conversation with Phil Jimenez, the first open and out creator of comic books for Marvel, for DC, for the majors, and what a trail he has blazed, what a path he has led, what a wonderful inspiration he has shown for all of us. And we thank him for this conversation tonight. And make sure you do tune in. As I said at the outset, we are here each and every freaking weeknight, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Come back to the Social Justice Power Hour. We are here for you. Please be here with us, especially next Monday when we host Phil's partner in the biggest comic of last year and this year, Wonder Woman Historia. So come out and see Kelly Sue DeConnick next Monday in the Power Hour, and all the other folks who are lined up to have these wonderful, meaningful, fabulous conversations. But it all means nothing without you, my friends. So please be here in virtual communion with us. Until soon, much love and respect. Be good to each other. Be good to your families, chosen or otherwise. And most especially, my friends, please be good to yourselves. You need it, and we need you here with us.
We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.